Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual CISO Podcast. I'm your MC, Jeremy Sporn, but missing today, the jelly to my peanut butter, John Very. But don't fret, although John could not be here to record this intro, he gave us a gift with this conversation he had with John Yeoh and Aaron Guzman from CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance. It was phenomenal to hear from these two leaders in the IoT and application security space on just how to frame the conversation around IoT security. These guys are the ones writing some of the best guidance available for IoT developers, manufacturers, consumers, really the people who need to understand if these devices can be trusted to protect our data. It was great to hear some of the why behind the guidance they are creating. Really cool stuff. I can't say enough how fortunate we are to have these two guys on the show. They work so hard on this guidance. If you depend on the security of an IoT ecosystem to run and grow your business, John Yeoh and Aaron Guzman are two of the best resources to help you know if your data is safe within these IoT ecosystems. This conversation will prep you extremely well to make great decisions when developing or purchasing an IoT solution. Now, let's get to the show.
John, Aaron, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
We're doing great, considering.
Doing well. Yep. Healthy. I'm good with that.
In COVID world, you can't look past that, right?
No.
So for any of our normal listeners, this is a little bit unusual. We've got two esteemed visitors instead of one today. Looking forward to seeing how this works out. Probably twice as much good information in the same period of time, which means that we should charge them about twice as much as we charge them. What's 2 times 0, John?
0.
I told you he was smart. All right. John, Aaron, would you guys be so kind as to give a brief introduction of who you are and what you guys do?
You bet. Hey guys, my name is John Yeoh. I'm Global VP over at CSA and Head of Research. And basically what that means is I manage a lot of the research assets that come out of the organization. That includes also a lot of the relationships that we have with standard development organizations, federal agencies, and other professional organizations to make sure that what we do is very applicable to the industry. And also everything that we do within the organization is also available to the industry. And we also try to do it 0 times 2, making that free to everybody as well too from a cost perspective. So that's the unique thing that we do.
Cool. Aaron?
Yep. My name is Aaron Guzman. I am the product security leader over at Cisco Meraki and the co-chair of the IoT Working Group with Cloud Security Alliance. Been involved for at least a handful of years. I feel like since the beginning when the IoT Working Group was part of the mobile working group. We kind of branched off from there. I also lead OWASP IoT projects as well as a number of sub-projects.
Gotcha. And are you involved with the attack surfaces stuff with the IoT?
I was, yes, a while ago. Yep.
Yeah, great. It's great guidance. So we always start easy. Before we get down to real business, I always ask the question: what's your drink of choice?
Boy, me, huh? I got to dive into whiskey, neat. Every time I travel, I love to try different bourbons from different regions, buy a small batch bottle, bring it back. I love the scotches. I love the local, American whiskeys and ryes. And to be honest, my collection's so big to this point, I just need to have both of you over and just have a big taste.
Yeah, where do you live? Where do you live?
I'm in Seattle.
Seattle. I don't know any. I'd take you up on that because I don't know any of the bourbons. I mean, the bourbon scene's active everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Any favorites on the bourbons? I'm a huge bourbon drinker. That's why I asked.
Yeah, there's a distillery called Westland. Now they do some bourbons, but they're mostly wheat mashes. It's very in the flavor of Scotch, and Westland's a pretty big distillery. They distribute all over, but that's one of my favorite ones. It's pretty close to where I live, and I've been following them for a long time. So yeah. Back in the day, in fact, they used to invite small groups of people over there to help them label their bottles, and then it'd be just a big tasting party too. So
you ever get to New York, pick up a bottle of Widow Jane out of Brooklyn, which is a really one of my favorite, super local. I mean, obviously there's a ton of great stuff out of Kentucky, But in terms of like local stuff, they're really good. Aaron, what about yourself?
I am not as high maintenance as you both. No, I'm just kidding. More of a cheap date. I mean, I would say before my go-to drink was like a Maker's Neat or Maker's and Coke, but I've kind of went on the health train, and it's all about seltzer Saturdays now. So.
And I'm assuming those aren't hard seltzers at this point.
Sparkling waters or whatever. I'm not picky.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nice.
Let's start pretty simple too. Is that you guys were very quick on the CSA, which is to me a really great organization. Who is the CSA? And what does it do?
Yeah, Aaron, maybe I'll start just from at least from an organizational perspective, where non-for-profit in the technology space, sometimes that can look a little weird, but our mission is really to just secure all forms of computing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think of non-for-profit, what the hell does that mean? We're very membership and community driven. So everything that we do operates within this community that we have, community based off of experts and stakeholders, and together we build these best practices, tools, and frameworks. And the most important thing is we make that available to the industry, to the community for free. So everything that's developed, internally with what we do, it's going to be one, available to the community for free, and then two, it's going to be very vendor neutral in the way it's designed. So we don't favor specific vendors. We really take the approach of securing all forms of compute. 11 years ago, starting with cloud, and as we've all seen the industry evolve, particularly in the last 7 months, it evolves to all aspects of compute, and cloud becomes a really core foundational technology of all these. And so cloud, IoT, securing forms of blockchain, and even preparing for the quantum age, it all becomes very relevant, and we try to address all these things.
Just to piggyback on kind of John's explanation of what CSA is, there's local chapters as well as local events, conferences, summits, in addition to working groups where we have the focus areas that John mentioned, blockchain, like IoT is one of them, and there are some of the more public or more projects that maybe have the more push behind them, and you might be familiar with the Cloud Controls Matrix as one of them, and the CSA Star for folks to kind of get certified as far as their infrastructure is concerned. But like John mentioned, the kind of core of things are kind of the free research that we put out, as well as some of the events as well, webinars and so forth.
Yeah, I think anybody that's listening, if you haven't seen the Cloud Control Matrix, and you're someone that's a SaaS or technology service provider, do yourself a favor, pick it up. I think it's one of the best forms of guidance out there on the market. What I like is we're big believers in open trusted frameworks, things like ISO 27001. What I like is the fact that you guys have taken that and then kind of built on top of that, right? Which is what that CSA STARS program does, right? It's a way to certify the Cloud Control Matrix on top of ISO 27001. Again, a really well done guidance. And today specifically, why we asked you guys if you'd be so kind as to share some time with us is, you've come out recently with some really cool guidance on IoT. It's a very big area for us right now, very big area for our clients, and I wanted to ask you some questions there. So with that, I'm going to ask you one that's going to sound like a stupidly simple question. But I don't know that it is anymore. And that is, what is an IoT device? And then I'm sure your answer is going to likely lead into the idea of an IoT ecosystem. So what's an IoT device, guys?
I'll take a first stab, and the first stab would be that an IoT device is a physical device or a service that is controlled remotely via a user interface, whether that be mobile or web, and it does have real-world kind of consequences with cyber physical systems as an example. But that's kind of, and it's network connected, so it has to be, controllable remotely. So that's kind of my explanation in a nutshell. If it's a device that's has network connectivity that's controlled via an app, to me that's considered IoT.
Yeah, I think it's a very broad term for sure, and I think like Aaron said, it's any device that has connectivity, especially internet connectivity. And I think it's not just a connected device these days, but it's the expansion of what that means, right? And we've all had laptops and mobile phones and computers that would connect to the internet, but the expansion of the type of devices that now connect to the internet is so different. And Aaron touched on those. We talk about sensors and really small compute devices that don't have their own operating systems. They connect differently, and so we need to protect them differently. The security around that is going to be very different. And what we try to do, I guess, is when we look at a connected device, we kind of take that top-down and bottom-up approach to where start from the device itself and how you would secure or connect that device, and then also from your systems itself that are connected to the device, how can we implement security across that? But when it comes to just a connected device, I feel like it's just, man, anything that's connected, any IoT device is anything that's connected to me.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. The reason why I said it's become such a difficult question. So you guys might have heard of the IOXT Alliance, right? So this is another alliance that's trying to come up with a framework. And Google actually, four of the first devices that were actually quote unquote IOXT aligned, or whatever the term they used were four Google Pixel phones. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, are we now going to consider a mobile phone an IoT device? And then I had a conversation with one of our clients, with a very high level person in their legal department. They have a huge array of IoT devices, and she defined an IoT device as per the California SB 327 guidance. And she basically said anything that can be authenticated from outside of the local area network, with no definition of what a local area network is, what that actually means, and what authenticated means, which is, really another crazy broad interpretation. So that was why I was asking, is like, I think in a weird way, it would be helpful if we had a better definition, right?
Yeah. In SB 27, I think it says directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, whatever other in between.
Yeah. And is Bluetooth a local area network? It's a, yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I think but technically it's a PAN, right? If you look at the definition, it's a PAN, not a LAN. So it is really an interesting. That's why I asked it as a question, and I meant it somewhat tongue in cheek, but I also mean it in a serious way, is because you do have the people that are saying, like, do I need to test this device? And it's like, and I don't know. I'm like, look, you got to consult legal counsel. I'm not sure what the definition anymore. I thought I knew a little bit ago. All right, so let's talk. So you talked about an IoT device. So let's talk about, you guys came out with what I think you might refer to as an IoT security controls framework, and an incredibly well thought out, well implemented version of one, I might add. So question for you is, who did you intend this for? Right? Did you intend it for end user organizations to understand IoT devices and what risk they might provide? An IoT platform provider, like a ThingWorx or PTC or Azure, or an IoT device manufacturer that is either leveraging one of those platforms or is actually rolling their own. Like, who's this intended for?
So the framework is initially designed for kind of system developers, folks who are implementing an IoT system in an enterprise, as well as designing an IoT architecture. So not necessarily from the manufacturer perspective, unless you are, let's say, creating a custom feature using, that API that's exposed to you. And now you have to undergo certain security processes to ensure you're not introducing new vulnerabilities, as an example, which is some things that we've considered in the framework, but it's really a holistic, from process to technical controls, to even, safety and privacy. So it's really holistic from that perspective, not necessarily completely, everything is a control that is testable, or at least from a technical perspective, but the process part is what helps there fill those gaps.
Yeah, I think we really took a page out of the cloud controls matrix too. So we can recall, talking about the cloud controls matrix earlier as a security control framework with high level objectives for security in cloud and throughout that cloud supply chain. And the IoT framework can be done in that similar way too. It was certainly designed with what Aaron had said in mind. But if you look at even some of the device layer controls in there too, they can be very specific to at least manufacturers understand, like, hey, maybe there's some default principles when it comes to the manufacturers, when it comes to sending out these devices to your customers. Maybe there's things that can be set as default. And if we remember that initial wave of IoT devices that went out to where default passwords, for example, administrative passwords weren't changed by default, and we saw huge vulnerabilities and exploits there. So it's things like this that I think that we can still give manufacturers guidance on too, as well as the implementers, the administrators, and the architect.
Gotcha. And the issue you talked about, right, that was the root cause, right, of the Mirai botnet, right? Wasn't the Mirai botnet caused by a whole bunch of IoT, I think it was cameras, video cameras, right, that had a bad default password, and they were able to use that and steal all the bandwidth, create gigabit EOS, yeah. Cool. So when you look at the IoT, like, I think there's another confusion, or not confusion, but maybe a lack of consideration, is that, IoT is a lot of the guidance around devices. But, when you look at an IoT ecosystem, right, there's a lot more to it than just a device, right? You've got the device, we've got a piece of software, often mobile software on iOS or Android, or a thick client device, that's intended to help you configure that, right? We've got the embedded web services and or API on the device in and of itself. So we've got a mobile app, we've got a cloud component, right? So we've got cloud infrastructure, we might have cloud API, we might have a cloud web app on top of that, and we may have ecosystem partners, right? You may be talking up through Cradlepoint. You may, let's say if we use Alexa as an example, and I hope she doesn't answer. Thank you. Yeah, I was waiting. But I mean, if you think about it, you're talking to her, and she's out talking to the Spotify cloud and other clouds, right? So again, same question. What pieces does the IoT security framework that you developed out of an IoT ecosystem address?
Well, we have 21 different domains that address holistic. I mean, we really think about the device as well as infrastructure as code checks. Like nowadays, you have Terraform, you have all these, Docker Kubernetes, you have Docker files, you have these YAML files. But putting automated kind of checks and validation checks from a build perspective or deployment perspective. But we even go as far as to add legal considerations. It has its own domain, which I think really sets itself apart from other pieces of guidance and best practices and documents out there, especially from a framework perspective. But I mean, I think literally from the ground up, we start with, knowing what you have. Asset management is the number one control domain. And, because you can't protect what you don't know you have, and you don't know how to protect it. You don't even know the versioning of it. So we start from asset management, config management, secure connections, and all the way down to security testing and the different types of security testing, which is, I might add, one of the newest sections that we've included in version 2. Security testing could be not only penetration testing, red teaming, but also like third-party assessments where you really don't have the in-house skill to, let's say, perform, the physical type of engagements. I would say like firmware, or hardware, or even wireless as an example.
Yeah, and then all the controls too, just to add on to what Aaron's saying, they're all applied architecturally. John, you mentioned before, it's applied to the devices, the networks, the gateway, and then the applications. And so you can kind of see within that ecosystem where specific controls apply. And I think that was the one big thing too is, I've had these conversations a lot in the past. We mentioned, again, I keep bringing up the cloud controls matrix, but it's a really highly adopted controls framework for cloud. And people are always like, why do we need one for IoT? Why is IoT so different? And we already talked about how different the networks are. Having these local and these LANs and PANs that you need to worry about. So you have all these different kinds of Bluetooth, Zigbee, and other sorts of short area wireless networks. You have the messaging protocols that are different between these devices. Because again, these devices are tiny. So we need to change messaging protocols. We need to change encryption protocols, certificate types. And so there's so many things that can go into changing this ecosystem to where we really felt like a framework needs to pay attention to these details at IoT. What makes IoT different, all these devices that we talked about, what separates them from the way we do things currently. And this framework highlights those things.
Gotcha. Do you dig down into the absolute weeds? I mean, like, so as an example, are we down into the JTAG UART world, right? Where it's like, recognizing whether or not these mechanisms exist once we've kind of deconstructed a device, and making sure that we're protecting against the risks associated with that, most notably probably downloading firmware off of the device.
That will likely come about as part of an assessment, the security testing phase.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much that an enterprise can do other than make better buying decisions and be informed through transparency. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we have a particular, from the manufacturing perspective, we would include that, but we actually have a secure configuration control that addresses like locking down debug interfaces.
Okay.
And again,
to me, those are essentially a form of a debug.
Yeah. And we don't get too prescriptive, just because, John, things change so quickly too, right? How you do configs, how you do, not to be too high level with the objectives, but they do have a purpose and a process, and then how you fulfill that. There's additional guidance that, CSA's working group will produce that complements the controls and how you implement those controls or test those controls, and other organizations too, such as, OWASP and CIS and a few others have aided in that.
Gotcha. Now, Aaron, you're making me very jealous here because you referred to version 2. Last time we chatted, we talked about version 1, and that's what I have downloaded. And if you saw me looking very anxiously at the screen, that was because I went to your website. And it still looks like I downloaded a copy on my other laptop before we started thinking, and I still got version 1. So how come I'm not getting version 2? I mean, the testing guidance is what I'm looking for, man. Where is it? You holding out?
Yeah. No, great question. And we had all intentions of releasing version 2 before the CSA September event. But essentially, it's going to come out in the next week or so in peer review. And we'll be sure to share that with you as well if you're interested in reviewing.
Would love to see it.
Yeah, so, these peer reviews are open to the public once they're released. But also what's open to the public, John, is joining a working group. So if you join the IoT Working Group, man, you're a part of the whole thing. You can start, you can contribute. You can see it right away.
I invite you on the podcast, and the way you pay me back is to give me homework to do, John. Aaron, he's not allowed. On the next time you come back on, don't bring John along with you, okay? I mean, he reminds me of Jim Gaffigan.
What happened to my bottles of bourbon I was bringing you? Can I
all right, I'll tell you what. Are we drinking bourbon at these working group sessions? If we are, and you're bringing, John, I'm with you, man.
All right.
This virtual thing is going to make it hard for me to drink your bourbon. I think you're going to drink your bourbon. I'm going to drink my own. But all kidding aside, if there is a way for us to sign up to be part of that review group and add comments and things of that nature, we're doing a ton of testing right now, and and having the most recent expert guidance and thought process on this would be fantastic. Because I mean, it is an emerging field. And for anyone to say that they're experts in it, or everyone to say they have everything figured out and they do everything perfectly, it would be a foolish thing to say at this point. I think we're all still learning. Cool. So any like sort of a sneak peek on what it's going to look like? Are you guys intending it to be more like a certification scheme? Where somebody can actually say that they had a CSA, IoT testing framework 1, accreditation, not a certification, but some. Do you guys see it that way, or is it just like this first document that I read, more what I would call an excellent form of guidance?
That is absolutely part of the plan. We do have an open certification group, working group, right, John, who has definitely been pushing us to try to get this in a more certification kind of roadmap. And that is our plan. Just pandemic put some brakes on some of the the mental capacity, but that's definitely part of the roadmap for sure.
Good. Yeah.
We're getting a lot of aid from other organizations too that wanted to participate in that too, like UL and some other folks who really see that as how can we take this framework, the controls here, and apply that to the ecosystem, from the manufacturers to the services, to the service providers, and then can individuals themselves get certified on saying like, hey, I understand IoT. I'm able to certify myself as a professional.
Cool. So you think you might even go with not only a more formal attestation scheme, but there might actually be certification programs for testers?
Yeah, we're kind of looking at all those things, John. And so hopefully, we'll see what it takes. We definitely listen to what the industry wants. If we need more professionals that are certified against something like that, we want to provide that to the industry. So
I think it would be awesome, because I think like right now there's a lot of people out chasing a lot of business to do this testing, and I almost feel bad for the people that are hiring people like us, because I mean there is no way to know like whether or not someone's qualified to do this. I mean they can have an OSCP, they can have a CWE, they can have a CEH. But this is a different beast, and these ecosystems are, and that's why I kind of talk about the ecosystem concept. I mean, you could argue that it's, you need to know the mobile application security verification standard. You could argue that, you need to know application security at the cloud. You need to do API security, and device testing is an absolutely unique field, right? So I applaud the effort and 100% in support of it, and we'll do anything we can to support you guys on it.
Hey, John, we actually plug those projects from OWASP in our security testing guidance to ensure that folks are using like industry standard.
I love this. We're I'm Aaron, you and I have talked about this once before. I'm an unabashed OWASP fanboy. We've been lucky enough to have some, you as I think the fourth great member of OWASP that we've had on. We've had Daniel Cuthbert on to talk about ASVS. We've had Andrew on to talk about the top 10. and we've had Jim Manico on to talk about security awareness training and
A
things.
lot of energy there.
Secure coding. Oh my God, he's a fun guy. I'd like to spend some time with him.
He's in New Jersey too.
Yeah, but now he's in like Hawaii,
Yeah,
right?
he's in Kauai. Yeah.
Oh wow, nice.
Sold out.
All right, cool. So we've alluded to, right? We've talked about the framework a little bit. Can you dig in a little bit different, right? Like there's 160 controls across 19 domains. One thing that I thought was really well executed about it was you take a very risk-centric approach, which to me is the right way to do things. And I'm surprised how often people don't. And that you also have the controls. You have a mechanism by which, based on the risk, you can prioritize the controls. Can you talk about a little bit of the framework, the construct, the different domains? Give someone like kind of paint a picture a little bit of it.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely have the core controls, right? Which folks will often look to first, and they'll be, okay, these controls matter to us. And we also have the impact levels, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we based it off of FIPS 199, 200 to kind of level set. Mm-hmm. And, usually an organization will define their own appetite for, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the default ratings that we gave for each control, could be different for your environment. We also supply supplemental directions for the particular control itself. It may help you in the implementation phase or in an auditing phase or an assessment phase. And additionally, we have areas that you can get more granular as far as the control type and whether it is something that you can automate where it's manual, as well as whether it is, I guess, the cadence, you can say. I'm trying to pull up the guide here so I can actually know word for word what I'm talking about here. But so we have the control type, whether it's manual, automatic, or semi-automatic, and the frequency is the implementation guidance there. And of course, that varies depending on your priorities and your industry. Mm-hmm. And then we further get granular whether that particular control applies to the device, the network, a gateway, or a cloud service. And that's one thing that we had changed. It was, I think, SaaS before, but we realized that cloud services are actually what's being consumed in an IoT ecosystem more than just a SaaS.
As we've gone, towards a Lambda style interfaces on stuff. Yeah, it's no longer SaaS, right?
Right.
Serverless computing is definitely something that I think we're going to see a lot more of in the IoT space.
Even device type was really unifying that too, just because, there's just so many different kinds of devices that are coming out to have a complete list with you're always limiting yourself when you try to come up with lists like that.
Yeah. I think your imagination is the limit of the types of devices that we're going to see, right?
Yeah, but we did try to create a pretty exhaustive list of controls. Mm-hmm. And then we know organizations, as they do with all frameworks, yes, you want to meet the requirements in the entire framework, but you're always going to pick and choose which ones are really important to you. And so at least if you have an exhaustive list to start with, you can then select and say, like, all right, this one's very applicable to what I'm doing now. This is very applicable to my environment. This protects me and my customers. So
that's what we try to do with the impact levels, right? The high criticality, we want you to focus on those, accordingly, and then probably prioritize the mediums and lows.
Yeah, that's what I thought was great about it, is that and it also allows you to go through in a risk-centric way and let me get rid of everything that's critical now. And any good control framework has the concept of continuous improvement. So I can knock off all the highs this year, and then I can kind of start working my way through the mediums. And even if I'm going through an ISO 27001 process, an example, the auditor wants to see continuous improvement. You guys gave them a built-in way of going through continuous improvement. Question for you: so you guys use so there's a couple terms that you use in there that are also ill-defined terms to me that I sometimes struggle with even myself. So talk about you use the term at the edge. So talk about when people talk about IoT, what is the edge?
That's great. We actually changed that wording.
You changed it?
We did because there was a little bit of ambiguity there with the edge. And I think that was part of the architectural allocations that we defined. We find device, network, gateway.
Yeah, you did at the edge and the network and the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was helpful. And I also like the fact that you used the term sensor and actuator, because I think it's interesting for people to think of it that way. B, actuators I think inherently have higher risk than just sensors do. So I like that as well. So what did you change at the edge to? Because I guess you agree with me. It's one of those oddly defined terms.
For sure. That was my big kind of nitpick for version 2. Was like, I'm writing this. I don't even know if this control applies to the edge, for this, particular domain. So what I was reading off of was version 2. So I apologize for that. So we changed those to device, to network, to gateway, and cloud service. So we simplified that to 4, rather than kind of, I think, the edge and fog and, all these other industry terms that.
Okay, so now you have my second. So you still have. So by the way, you still haven't answered my edge question.
I mean,
what is your definition of the edge?
I think the edge is, especially with IPv6, right? I mean, you have devices, who are connected via, 4G and soon to be 5G, that they'll have their own edge or rely on the, internet provider. I think the term was coined initially by a certain manufacturer as far as the edge is concerned, and it's not really a term that I've ever agreed with. Okay. But for me, it's like, wherever that device is placed in, contextually in that environment, it varies based on the firewall, based on the device, if its own host-based kind of firewall system, whatever it may be. So I don't have a clear answer for you because that's
good. You're making me feel it's good when the guy who's writing IoT guidance, tells me it's a little unclear, because I got to be honest with you, I literally do struggle with that term. I always had this image of the edge being something where there was some form of interpretation of data happening prior to getting all the way back to the cloud, to the center. You know what I mean?
That's such a big part of it too. I think the best way to even explain edge is if you look at connected vehicles, right? Mm-hmm. If you have these sense, understand, and act methods that you need to do if you're, let's say, implementing braking systems with a pedestrian in front of you. So if you need to process that information, put it back up to your cloud, and then bring it back down. I mean, there's a lot of latency there. And if you need to react quicker, you need to have those kind of analytics somewhere at the so-called edge. So that's where that edge, I think, story started. And, we touched on earlier too, right, Aaron, with 5G. I mean, if we think of 5G capabilities now to where, 5G capabilities to now replace corporate networks. If you can start, lighting up corporate buildings with 10 gigabytes per second, there's going to be a lot of cost savings there. And you're going to just go directly to 5G networks. And we even see some of the major cloud providers that are now moving stuff out of their data centers. And you have data and information now that's just going to be living in an active 5G network. I mean, that's pretty incredible if you think about it. So I think what we're doing with IoT, this IoT framework, and even if you want to call something edge or network based, it could be there in the future. It could be there permanently. And so really? That's something to think about.
And do you think that an edge, like what about devices that do their own AI? So like you said, autonomous vehicles, right? There's some level of AI that takes place maybe in the cloud, but there's some level that takes place at an edge. Can a device itself be considered the edge? Like if it's making some decisions that way, or is an edge some intermediary between the device and the brain, the central cloud APIs?
There's that broad term, right?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you one more confusing term to me that I always struggle with, and it's a NIST term, which makes it even worse, is fog.
Yeah. Brian could definitely hammer that one in. He definitely talked about fog.
You guys are making me so much better. I got two guys that are smarter than me, and they both look at me a little bit like, yeah, it's one of those tough ones.
Yeah, honestly,
fog was though, right? Before it gets to the cloud, all that processing that happens there, and I know there's a provider that coined that term too, and it got into NIST.
So the fog is the crap that happens before you get to a full cloud.
Yeah. Again, it's all that stuff that has to get processed closer to the device. So it's not just about device and cloud. There needs to be some processing in between, and that's that fog layer. That's that edge layer.
Okay, so they're similar concepts.
Yeah, closer to the device, there needs to be processing power and capabilities and analytics, and the ability to make decisions and understand something. And so that's this whole edge fog terminology came to be.
That's cool.
You know, it's funny too. Is the conversations I had had a conversation with NASA a number of years ago, and that was one where really, rung in my head where they're like, yeah, John. So if we have satellites out there, and we're trying to send stuff back to the cloud here on Earth, we're going to have several, light years of information that's going to take, before we can actually process something. So there needs to be analytics and decision making at the end closer to these devices. And yeah, it makes absolute sense. If it's a satellite in space, if it's a satellite, way out.
Yeah, I never thought about that. The transit time, the latency associated with something of that nature.
Right.
That's pretty crazy now when I think about it. Now, all those adjustments that you're making to trajectory and things of that nature, you're having to anticipate, like latency has to be calculated in. How long ago did they send that? How long is it going to take to get there? Because that's going to be part of that, adjustment of, yaw angle, whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's the best way to see it. I know when we talk about milliseconds and microseconds, it's still very applicable here on Earth too. But when I saw it from their perspective, I was like, there's clear gaps in latency that you can see for sure.
Yeah, when you talk about, like you start talking about the whole smart car, smart traffic, whatever the buzzword you want to use. Yeah, I mean that kind of latency could result in the car-to-car communication latency can't be very high in order for it to be very effective, because at 60 miles an hour you move at 88 feet per second. That's not a lot of space.
Yeah.
Lives. Yes. Exactly. So I always joke around with people is that the only thing worse than too little guidance is too much guidance, right? So you guys have put out some great guidance. CIS, you mentioned asset management. That's CIS CSC 20 top number 1. NIST has come up with 8228 and 8259. Anisa put out some really interesting stuff, and they've broken theirs down into smart cities and smart factories, and they've broken Internet of Bodies. They've broken down theirs. There's SB 327 that we talked about. Talk about, like you guys are a research organization. How much are you communicating with these other bodies? How much are you sharing? How much are you trying to harmonize? I got to imagine that's a challenging issue to deal with on your side as well.
Yeah, always challenging, but I think that's the key word, is to harmonize. And maybe what you might not see so much, because it happens maybe more behind the scenes, is that we have our working groups. They're very strong. But they don't work in a vacuum. We have such tight relationships. I mean, someone like Aaron, who's very tight with OWASP and another bunch of other organizations, is important. We have formal and informal relationships with a lot of these different organizations, standard developments, even the major providers and the provider groups that they have. I think that's a pretty key component of it, and that's probably one of the magic things that CSA is pretty good at, is that we've had, it starts with our CEO, Jim Rivas, who had a lot of relationships within all these different organizations, and he built an executive team that could do the same thing, that could build off of these relationships and make sure that, what we're doing isn't just happening within our small little tight community, but it's also expanding, and it's kind of echoing throughout the industry, because we have relationships with all these other different organizations. And we're also, it's a two-way traffic too, right? It's not just us telling them what's going on. They're telling us. I meet with NIST, multiple times a year, and we actually have these brainstorming sessions on, hey, what are you doing? Here's what we're doing. Let's line up our roadmaps to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're very complementary of each other. Mm-hmm. Important to do.
Yeah, I had Dr. Ross on earlier this week. He's a fascinating guy to talk to and hear about the sort of the history of cybersecurity and practices and standards. So I'm super excited to hear that you guys are interacting with them, because they put out a lot of great guidance as well. And OWASP is, to me, what I like about you also doing is OWASP to me is the leading software guidance in the world. And realistically, if you think about it, the IoT is software. I mean,
everything's software.
Yeah, everything's software. Yeah, you're right. So I think the idea that that you're so tightly connected with OWASP and using their guidance just definitely puts you in a really good spot.
And we, I mentioned peer reviews coming up for the controls framework. We definitely make sure to include each of those groups, Anisa, UL, even folks at NSP who run the SESIP, which is another.
I'm sorry, I don't know what NSP is.
Yeah, it's SESIP. It's a European-based assurance framework for IoT. I think 5 different levels. In addition, we'll reach out to like IoT Security Foundation,
Right.
everyone basically that we have contacts with, and just to make sure, number one, they're aware of our work. Number two, they have the opportunity to provide feedback, and three, they're likely going to map to something in our work at one point. So, that helps as well.
Gotcha.
But we have joint projects that we do work together. When we're not working independently. So those have been few and far between. Although even when in ESA, for example, they have new research projects that come out, they'll ping our team to get involved and be part of the experts panel.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're very public and I think very transparent, and I think that helps so that everybody can see, hey, here's what's happening. It's not a secret. We welcome your involvement, and we want you to hear what we're doing, and we want to hear what you're doing.
Cool stuff. So for someone who's listening, right, and starts to think like, okay, now you got my attention. Do I have any IoT devices that I need to be worrying about? How do they best answer that question?
Jeez, that's a big one, especially with that new announcement that Amazon made that has the autonomous drone, the home security camera that flies around your house. Like, what? We are there. We are here.
Well, I actually have a robot vacuum that will do the same. Like I can navigate from anywhere I am. I can navigate the vacuum around the house to see where the dog is because it's got a video camera and LiDAR on it, and it'll find the dog and give me live footage and allow me to talk to the dog through it. So I'm sitting there like, so I'm thinking as you're saying that, like, I think I better go turn that damn thing off.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a risk, right? Especially with the data that's being used to make that device function correctly, but also for them to make their products better and things that you might not be aware of that they may be correlating with, which is the scary part that people don't really seem to understand. Your TVs, your vacuum, your assistants, whatever it is. Just have to be mindful, ensure that you're properly protecting those devices, their accounts. Multi-factor authentication is definitely one area that can help in any type of account, whether it's IoT or not. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just be mindful, right? If you're buying a cheap connected device from, say China or Russia or something, it's probably not going to have good security posture, good updates, good account. They're probably not caring about your data and how to handle that.
Yeah, I don't know about the two of you too, but I'm a pretty heavy consumer of connected devices, and the capabilities are incredible. And so if you think about it from a business perspective too, capabilities are really nice. You want to certainly make sure they're fit for purpose. I do remember this was 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was a joke, but I remember on Twitter they were talking about a birth control testing device that was internet connected, and it would actually tweet the results to your
oh my gosh.
your community, right? And so
why?
Understand what you want that's connected if it makes sense. So that should be connected. That's pretty important. I love what Aaron said about access. Access is so important, and multi-factor, two-factor authentication is so easy to put on everything. But follow the data. Follow the data, especially if you're an enterprise and that the IoT system can really enhance your customer experience and help your business. Follow the data. Is the data that you're collecting, is it protected? Is it have customer information there? Is it protected? Do the right people or sources or the devices themselves, do they have access to the right things? So access, privileges, and just if you follow the data, you can kind of see where all the vulnerabilities are going to be. So it's almost that privacy by design, security by design approach. But yeah, follow the data is a really important starting point at least.
Yeah, I like the follow the data idea. And you're making me think about, the problem is that a lot of people I don't think through the implications of data. So as an example, I'm just thinking about that robot vacuum I have. It uses LiDAR and it created a map of my house. Mm-hmm. And you can not only see where the furniture is, but I mean, what rooms are which, what's in each room. And then of course, anytime I connect to it to roam it around the house to see where the dog is, what does that tell somebody? He ain't home.
Yeah.
So you know where the bedroom is, where the wife's got the jewelry, I'm not home, where the dog is because I just showed you. So I do think you also have to understand, like, you have to think through. It's not just a matter of following the data, but it's also thinking about the implications. I love the story of it was the story of how the reporter from like the Washington Post knew that the Baghdad bombing was about to begin and published it or tweeted it not long, like 15 minutes before, a half hour before. And he did it based on the fact that all of the pizza companies in the area, there was an inordinate number of pizza deliveries he was sitting outside and he saw all these pizzas being delivered. And he knew, okay, it's going to be a late night. What's going on? And that's how he figured out what was going on. So it's amazing. Sometimes it's not only the data that they have, but what are the implications? How can someone use that data in a way that you don't expect it to be able to be used?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One other question for you. Do you give any guidance or either in the standard, or do you have any other additional guidance on how somebody would know if they had an IoT device on their network? Right. So as an example, if I'm looking at a video camera, how do I know if that's an IoT device? Is there an easy way for somebody listening to know that?
I mean, hopefully you're running, number one, you're running for enterprise, some sort of, asset management scans or even ping sweep scans, or using something to help manage, what you have in your network, what type of devices are there, what versions, and also, who they may be communicating with as far as the server infrastructure. As far as consumer-wise, I mean, if you hopefully, you have folks here who are tech savvy who can log into your home router, and there's some pretty interesting product lines that are being released and being marketed as IoT security home routers. Mm-hmm. That give you push notifications when new devices join your network, when they leave your network, when they're visiting sites they maybe shouldn't have. I'm not saying that I'm marketing those, but I think they're interesting. It's a whole different side that's been introduced the last, I think, 2 years now. Mm-hmm. And it could be something that be of use for not only parental controls, but more of just being aware of what you have in your network. It could be a starting point.
Yeah, it's an excellent starting point.
Yeah, those are great too. And so many people are coming with new scanning tools that not only scan your environment for what's connected to your network, if it's a corporate network or a home network, but it also does the device categorization for you too. So I know there's a lot of hospitals solutions that now will do that too, to where you can scan your entire building and understand how many different medical devices are connected, what type of medical devices they are. These MRI machines down to are they insulin pumps and heart monitors. And so yeah, it's pretty good to understand not just what you have, but what types of devices are connected, and then more importantly, can you do something about it? So can you actually well,
you can always enforce it. Look, you can always block it inbound and outbound at the firewall, right? Minimally.
Right.
So I mean, so you can, but I do think you're right. I mean, I think the concept of asset management, the concept of knowing what's on your network is critical, and then making decisions on whether or not the potential risk is justifies the value prop or whatever that device does for you, right?
Yeah. But so many times do we see people that they have the logs, they can see everything, but they have no really capability. They don't have ability to manage all those logs that are coming in, and so if the red lights are flickering and going off and on, there's still nothing you can do about it because you just don't have the team in place to address it. So that's another thing where, hey, tools are fun if you know how to use them, and actually can use them.
Hopefully you have policy to back that, right? Internal processes like a BYOD, hopefully to discourage folks to, who have consumer devices that want to plug into your corporate network. I don't know where everyone, where your listeners are at, but at least you have something to stand by. Like, hey, no corporate assets that aren't given, from the organization should be allowed on these networks. If you want to connect your network, here's the guest network that's segmented. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think our the bigger companies that listen to this would definitely be there. But I think when you get into some of the SMBs, that concept of NAC or network access control, a little bit harder. Although with some of the stuff Microsoft's doing now, because so many people moving to Office 365, and like Intune is kind of a poor man's NAC, right? In a way, I mean, so there are some ways to do it that are getting to a point where it's reasonable for even a smaller company to do. So that was for someone who. Yes, Iraqi. That's true. Sorry about that. I should have thought of Cisco. Go ahead, Aaron. You can beat me up for that one. I go out. I'm sorry. It's so funny because I think of you as being the IoT guy from OWASP, but and that it was new to me that you were the CSA guy. And by the way, it was new to me today that you were the Cisco Meraki guy. I didn't know the last time we chatted. I didn't realize that. So sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
One other question for you. So we talked about if someone's listening who just wants to know, do I have an IoT device in my network? What about if someone's listening that is developing some kind of a solution? Whether they're building a device, they're integrating off-the-shelf components into a solution. I mean, I know this might sound stupid, but how do they know if what they're building is an IoT device? And I literally had a conversation with someone recently that asked me that exact question. Hey, we got this group doing this. Is that an IoT device? Do I need to worry about that? And if so, what are the most important steps 1 and step 2 to get them going in the right direction, using your guidance?
What? They don't know. I'm a little worried.
Right. I mean, there's certainly, right, we mentioned there are a number of...
Just for the record, though, John, it was a PE firm that was backing some technology spinning out of a university. So they had developed this. It was wearable biomedical technology. And I'm talking with the guy that's funding them, the money behind it, and they're ready to roll this out. And he's like, "Do I need to worry about it? Is this an IoT? Is this IoT? I keep hearing about IoT." So that was it. So my question was actually like a real question. Like, so in that case, how would you answer that? How does somebody know if what they're doing is IoT? And if so, like, what would you tell them to do? What are the first couple things you tell them to do?
I think one of our first papers, correct me if I'm wrong, John, we addressed a lot of the manufacturing and design perspective, future-proofing the connected world. And we really lay out, not only the challenges and how what a device is, but also what manufacturers should be doing from a process perspective, from a testing perspective. And I think we provided a checklist. I know it's been some years. I haven't had a chance to look back at it, but I mean, that's definitely one resource that someone can reference. There's several others, and we talked about Anisa, and they have a baseline for IoT security, and they break that down in different industries, and even further to good practices for developing secure IoT, which was released earlier this year, and what will be released later this year, which I'm working with them on, is on the supply chain of IoT security. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of different angles you can take this. But at least maybe you'd have to do some due diligence and read up on some of the guidance that's out there and determine, hey, is this applicable to the service I'm providing, the device that I'm writing for, and am I properly protecting it? Am I properly securing it and putting the controls I should be putting in? And especially if it's going into a regulatory environment, is it using FIPS? Modules? Is it doing X, Y, Z? John, do you have any suggestions there? Any other things you might want to add?
I was going to say just that whole top-down, bottom-up approach, and here's why I think too. I think there's a lot of devices that are created today that become smart later, right? So they become connected. So people will add connectivity because it's like, hey, think of even our household appliances now that we can connect to some sort of device, and now I have remote access to that. And so bottom-up, top-down approach, what I mean by that is so you start with that device. Is the device secure? Do we have security in the device itself? The messaging protocols that are being sent to wherever, and then security from the top, where the cloud service that might be connecting to it, that might be managing that device or procuring that device, and maybe even orchestrating that device throughout your network. So understanding it from both, if you can attack it from both sides, you can ensure a little bit better that you have a pretty secure device because you're securing it on different layers, different platforms that interact with your network and that are part of that whole IoT ecosystem.
I'll start from an easier perspective real quick, and I'm gonna plug OWASP, the IoT top 10. Start there.
That's actually good guidance as well. I mean, the only other thing which is interesting too is I like the stuff that you guys have done. What I would almost be tempted to do would be to almost kind of understand the risk and use some of the stuff that you guys have given. Like, because if you think about it, you already started like with the concept of security categorization. So if we just look at the information that we're processing, I mean, that would be one of the things that I would tie it to is like, is this HIPAA data? Is this personal information? And depending upon the impact and the regulatory compliance requirements and the impact if you don't meet them, that would kind of map to your low, medium, high, and kind of going back through and then looking at what you guys are doing against, leveraging that low, medium, high would be probably also another interesting way to do it. Almost conduct a risk assessment, if you will, almost using your tool in reverse to assess the risk of the solution that you're developing.
Start with like the raw data that device is collecting and understand what's being used for. Yeah.
So interesting stuff.
Yeah, my thought and my hope was one day to convert or move the data that's in the controls framework over to a simple application that can help with filtering and mapping and some of these conversations that we're having. It's just a matter of resources and time, but definitely want to try to look into that further for future versions and hopefully provide a companion tool that'll make using some of our research and guidance more approachable.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be very hard because because you have a lot of the basics already there to understand risk. And if you could almost put just an overlay on the front, that would be the type of you could almost categorize, if you think about it, if you almost had the equivalent of a FIPS 199 security categorization process on the front side, and they map to medium, you could then basically filter your controls and prioritize guidance based on that. And if you asked a few more questions, with regards to the type of a device, use case, you can probably get there reasonably quick. Because the amount of information that you have in the worksheet already is really ridiculously good. And you can even you can prioritize preventative versus detective controls and things of that nature as well. Because that's all built into your sheet. So I think it's a great idea, and I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be that much work to do it. Is what's really interesting with the way you guys laid out your document.
So step one could be watch this podcast. Step two is to call Aaron. Here's his number. 818-555.
Step three is to send John a bottle of your best bourbon from the region.
Oh,
and then step four would be he'll answer the call with a glass in hand when you call. So last question. So you referred to this in version 1, Aaron. I gotta be clear. The version that I have a copy of, not the one you have a copy of. You refer to this as base level security controls. So I'm curious, I think you guys, if I look at what you do with the cloud control matrix, I think you've been true to the concept of defining fundamental controls that apply across all instances of cloud. When you look at IoT, I think there are specific use cases, smart cars, smart cities, Internet of Bodies, right? Smart factories, Industry 4, I think they call it, right? Do you see your guidance as going across all those, or do you foresee in future that you'll start to branch a little bit for, some of those use cases, which might be a little bit different, right? Like smart cars are not conventional IoT devices in the fact that there'll be so much more car-to-car communication as, built into that.
I think we've definitely had those discussions, and it's been it could be challenging, right? We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves with the amount of effort. We have to have folks who are experts in that area, and I think those landscapes between automotive and medical are changing rapidly fast. Especially again, if one of us in the working group isn't working there every day, we could miss some things. So it's definitely still up for grabs if we do have someone to come help out and get us on that right page, right foot forward, and what's really applicable. I think we all have had experience in medical in some way, shape, or form, whether it's device, whether it's a provider, whether it's a cloud. But we haven't had concrete discussions. Maybe John knows more and can answer on that front, but that's as far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, even with the cloud framework, there was always due diligence that you had to do, right? So when you're establishing baseline security as a start, but there's due diligence that you want to do with your providers and an IoT, with your manufacturers, your network administrators, and your application providers too. But yeah, if you're applying something to industry-specific areas, that's something that, again, within the CSA community, that we offer that. So the healthcare, specifically the healthcare sector, the financial services sector, and the entertainment sector, so those are the major movie producing studios, they've all taken stake into taking that cloud controls matrix, that security framework, and applying it specifically to their industry. And I would imagine, especially in healthcare, where IoT is at top of mind, that as soon as version 2 is ready, they're going to be really willing to consume that and start applying prescriptive guidance for that industry. And that would be the next step. And so, John, yes, I think that's definitely something that should be done. And Aaron will make sure that all the healthcare organizations that are working on those types of things consume, digest, and bring back to the IoT Working Group what they think is very specific and prescriptive for them.
John, I'm not sure if are you familiar with I Am the Cavalry?
Yeah.
I Am the Cavalry?
Yeah. With Josh Corman and Bo Woods and a lot of the folks. No? Okay. They're actually pushing a lot of the kind of security processes and bills that have been passed over the last few years. And I'm also part of that group. They're much more familiar, ears to the ground, and all of the pre-market guidance, post-market guidance, responsible disclosure work that they push for medical and software bill of materials, NTIA and transparency. They're definitely the folks who are leading in that area. And I can connect you as well.
Yeah, that's a big. I've been referencing them for quite some time too. I think they do great work, but absolutely, I can't even remember. Maybe Aaron, you might have introduced them to me years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But either that or just kind of maybe I stumbled across them myself. But yeah, absolutely. Let's make sure that the intentions are clear and that they know. We both know what each other's up to, so we can do that. Yeah, we don't want to start over and reinvent the wheel. We want to do things together. So that sounds great.
Sounds cool. So anything we missed, guys? Any last thoughts that we should cover? You guys have been incredibly gracious with your time. Probably over an hour already. So.
Yeah, boy, no, this is fun.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Right.
I mean, I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh crap. Sorry.
I know. I missed the meeting.
Didn't feel that long. Yeah. No, it's fun talking shop. I mean, it really is. But yeah, I thought this was great. Last question. Two last questions. I was going to say the last question is, do you have any ideas for a future episode? But I have another question. I have an idea for a future episode. Can I get one of you guys or both of you guys or somebody else on your team to come back when the testing guide comes out? Because I really think that that's an important concept, and I would love to talk through how you guys anticipate that all working.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other thought process on another interesting topic for another episode, especially anything around IoT?
Yeah. We still did that 5G talk a little bit, but I think, like I said, if 5G has the capability to, potentially even replace data centers. Remember the old saying, hey, the cloud is just somebody else's computer? It's certainly gone beyond that, but if we're talking about a 5G network that replaces corporate networks and potentially replaces, data centers to where, boy, that changes, how we do security. And what we're doing in security right now for IoT becomes, just the way we do security. So this is so important. I think what we're doing is to understand the IoT, because everything, according to that definition that we talked about earlier, anything connected is IoT, but it could get to the point where, how we secure our current systems becomes obsolete, 5G.
Really? I knew that the bandwidth would change this ability for sensors and the speed at which these devices and the amount of data. I didn't realize that it, and I knew it had implications on IoT. I didn't realize it had that many implications on broader corporate infrastructure, network architectures.
Interesting, right? It certainly has the potential to do just that. And so, everything comes down to cost and business operations, right? And so if you can actually administer, a 5G network and then replace your own corporate network and everything that goes around maintaining that, boy, yeah. I guess, wouldn't you? I think we saw.
I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Because what you're saying is that the reason we have these corporate networks is so we could run like 1 gig point to point, to get the connectivity that we need. And then we pay for these high speed lease lines and things of that nature. Once you get to a point where, do you remember, I'm old enough to remember George Gilder and Telecosm, which was, one of the greatest papers ever written, where he theorized in like the 1990s that once bandwidth is omnipresent, right, that the components of a computing system, you no longer need to have a computer, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where the microprocessor is. It doesn't matter where the storage is. Doesn't matter where the disk is. Doesn't matter where the memory is, because the only reason they're all self-contained is because we need that high-speed bus. You're almost taking that same concept and applying it to networks, right?
It seems so out there, but 5G is really the reckoning of, oh my gosh, this is maybe a lot closer than we think. And when you think of those kind of capabilities, like I said, it's so much more important what we're doing for IoT right now, and the potential to replace certain network components that we're doing right now in the large enterprise.
That's cool. And either you or somebody on your team is somebody that's figuring all that stuff out?
Yeah, actually, I wish Brian was here too, because Brian and I were both on the FCC Technical Advisory Committee for IoT, and 5G was a big component, and so we did a little bit of that like back in 2015, 2017, and 2019, and so yeah, there's a.
Yeah, but the only question is that will we all be here with the 1 millimeter waves kill us all?
Oh, man.
Yeah. And there's a story that I can't tell that would make me believe that that's a possibility. But this, I would never see the light of day if I told that story. Aaron, any thoughts from you?
I mean, CSA has a ton of great work. I think you could definitely tap some of the other working groups and probably gauge what would be. I think right now we just released top threats. The top threats working group released research there, and I think we want to try to incorporate IoT top threats in there at some point.
Yeah, didn't you also do didn't you also have like a cloud threats?
Yep, that's what it is.
Is that the one that you're talking about? You have a new version of that out?
Yep, just released within the month, right, or a couple weeks.
Oh, I would love that. I would, I just for the record, I sorry, my dog decided that it's time for the podcast to be over.
Excited about it too, right?
All kidding aside, actually, who would be John? Who would we reach out to? Because we actually we're trying to get to someone to talk about the cloud threats. Because I think right now with especially now with COVID and cloud adoption having even advanced beyond what it was, that would be a fantastic topic. Because I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that, the vast majority of our clients don't understand the concept of shared responsibility. They assume once they push something to the cloud that it's somebody else's problem and that security is somebody else's responsibility. And, depending upon which model, infrastructure, platform, SaaS, I mean, you still own, user account management and authentication and authorization, or you own all the way down to like owning some of the responsibility for the network infrastructure and system. And I don't think people understand that. Oh, no, you don't understand. It's at Amazon. No, you don't understand. Amazon owns this much. You still own this much of the security responsibility, which is what your cloud documents did such a good job of, I think, communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. I can connect you. Our co-chairs are John Michael Brook. He's a principal architect for Starbucks. And then Alex Getson is another OWASP guy too. And so, those two would be great people to talk about the top threats on. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll ask Jeremy to reach out because I think that would be a really cool discussion. All right. So before I say farewell, and if folks want to get in contact with either of you guys, what's the best way to do it?
My email address is aaron.guzman@owasp.org. You can find me. I'm not very difficult to find. Find me on LinkedIn, something like that. Feel free.
Yeah, same here. I think LinkedIn is a great way to get a hold of me. Emails are okay, but
yeah. In other words, don't send me an email. John, just mess up. There's nothing wrong with that. You sound a little. I mean, that sounds pretty modern to me. I mean, don't bother me with email.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, something like that. Yeah.
Well, listen, guys, thank you so much. I genuinely enjoyed talking with you guys. This was a great episode. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You too. Thanks, guys.